This video is about pushing data to Webflow CMS, and we will show how you can use a single Byteline task node to update, insert, or delete data from Webflow CMS. And in this example, as we need to source data from somewhere to demonstrate the capability of Byteline, we'll be using Reddit for that matter. So let's start. So let me show you the setup first. This is Byteline console web page, console.byteline.io. And on Webflow side, I have the CMS collection called Reddit posts. So now let me show you the columns that I have. Name, where the title of the post will go, and slug is the unique value per record, and we will use a permalink from Reddit for this purpose. And then who created the post, the posted date from Reddit, and then override and status column. I'll discuss more in the later part of the video. And from Reddit, we're gonna use subreddit called side project, and we're gonna source data from here. So let's add a flow. So when you log into Byteline and you don't have any flows, so this is the screen that you see. Now let's add our first flow. For this purpose, I'm gonna use a scheduler based flow. What that means is that this flow will be triggered using a scheduler, and I want to run this every couple of hours. So I'm gonna pick every 3 hours. So every 3 hours this flow will be triggered, and it will get data from Reddit and push to Webflow CMS, and is gonna intelligently uh, find out whether it needs to add a new record or whether an existing record needs to be updated. So let's add Reddit node first, and we'll configure it to get data from side project. So first thing is we need to sign in into Reddit, because this is a requirement of Reddit. To use their APIs, a user need to be signed in. This takes you to Reddit's page to give Byteline permissions. So click on allow button. This is successful, and you can close this tab. So we are now back on Byteline console, and you can click on refresh button to get the updated status. So now it says it's connected. This is the subreddit from which we want to get the data. So let's save it, and let's test this simple flow. So for running any flow, the first requirement is to deploy the changes. And then the button next to it is to do a test run. So eventually this flow is gonna be running in the background every couple of hours based on your scheduler configuration. But we want to make sure that the flow is running successfully. So it's done, and we can see the data we got back from using this information icon. So this is the data, and then it says the 25 records were pulled from Reddit. And now under this children array, it shows each post. And we're gonna use this data in our next node, which is Webflow CMS. So now let's add that node. So that is Webflow update items. If you can see my cursor. So now let's configure this node. So for Webflow CMS, we need to configure a bunch of fields to push data there. So first requirement is let's first sign in into Webflow. So on my browser, because I earlier logged in into Webflow, the connection information is there, and it logged me into my Webflow account. And now here it's showing me the sites that I have in my account. And for this purpose, I'm gonna use update Webflow CMS items, because this is the site that I will be using. So this is successful. Let's close it and go back to our flow, refresh this data, and now we have a connection with Webflow CMS. So now it asks you like which site is it. So it's update Webflow CMS items, and within that I'm gonna use Reddit posts collection. And now it shows us all the columns that are available on Webflow CMS. Um, and then going back here, so we're gonna just need to configure, we don't need to configure all the columns. So I'm gonna get rid of the columns that we don't need to configure right now. So I'm gonna take out override, take out status, and then these two last columns, archive and draft, these will be always false. So I'm gonna just say it so. And we're gonna eventually take out these two fields so that a user don't need to specify them. Um, okay, so now let's get into the concept of loop over. So loop over provides you a simple way to iterate over multiple items and execute a task config for each of those items. So in this case, we got data from Reddit, and we want to do Webflow CMS update for each of those records. So that's why loop over is required. And usually in other no code systems, you need to use a complicated mechanism to achieve iteration. So you will need a iterator node, then at the end you will need an aggregator node. But in here we are just using a simple loop over concept to configure that same functionality. And you can read more about it using the tech docs. You can just click on this information icon, and it will take you to the page where loop over concept is explained in detail. And also, if you want to read more about Webflow CMS functionality or Byteline's Webflow CMS functionality, you can click on tech docs on the bottom right link here. So this is our Webflow CMS items page. So it provides all the technical documentation on how to use, how to integrate with Webflow CMS. Okay, so now let's configure our loop over. So this is, so if you see this node, so this is all the data we got from Reddit. And under this children is each of the posts that we got. So let's select this for our loop over. So what this means is that this task will be executed for each post or each record within this children element. So we just pasted it there. And now let's get data on author on all of these columns. So author is this field, author full name. So now as you pasted the path we got from the select variable tool, and we pasted it here, it converted it automatically into a format that's required for loop over. So at dot, so what this means is a child element of this loop over, right? So if you see our select variable tool, I forgot to mention details about this tool. So the select variable tool gives you all the data that is available in the context of the flow, and you can use this data in any of your task nodes. and it provides these small gray buttons, and if you click on those buttons, it copies the X path of the, not X path but JSON path of the data into your clipboard, and then you can just paste that value over into any of your tasks. So we already got the full name. Now let's get the posted date. So I'm trying to find where the posted date is. So that is created, um, and we'll just copy this path. And now see this number, this is not a formatted date, but what this means is the epoch time. So we just copy this. And now to convert it into a format that Webflow CMS understands, we will just use our pipe converter. So what that means is you just insert pipe and you can write date time. So now it will convert this data into date time that is easily understood by Webflow CMS. So now let's get the name, and name in this case is gonna be title of the post, and that is over here. Let's copy this. And now for slug value, so slug needs to be a unique value for each record. And this value is very important because we're gonna use this value to figure out whether a row already exists in Webflow CMS. And if it's already existing, then we update the record instead of inserting it. Because if we don't update, we're going to end up with duplicate records. So we provide this intelligent functionality on finding out whether a record already exists based on the slug value. And in this case, I think the best field that we can use for slug is their permalink. So let's copy this, and now see the format of permalink. It has slashes in it, and Webflow CMS doesn't allow slashes in the slug value. So we're gonna replace all the slashes with the underscores. So let's copy this. So again it converted. So now we're gonna use a different pipe converter to replace slashes with underscores. So now what this means is this is a replace function, and we are saying replace all the slashes by underscore. Okay, so that's our task configuration for Webflow CMS. So let's test it out, and then we'll jump into the advanced tab. So again deploy, because we made changes to the flow. And now let's run it. Let's test it out. Okay, so this is successful. And now let's look into the stats of how many records it inserted. Okay, so here it says 25 records are inserted. And now let's check out our Webflow CMS account. So right now it shows 0 records because the data is not yet refreshed. But let's just reload this page. Okay, so this is all the data we got from Webflow CMS. And now let's look into one example. So this is the name and this is the slug. So see, for slug we replace the slashes with underscores. So that's what we got. And this is the author, posted date. Okay, so that's how we got. We don't want to save this change. Yeah, so that's what we got, all the records from Reddit. And now if you compare with the Reddit data, so this is what the data is, and that's what we got in Webflow CMS. So now let's go back to the flow. So now I want to explain you update and delete functionality. So now we already got 25 records. So now let's see what happens when we run this flow again. So we don't want it to insert duplicate records. So now see, it figured out that the records are already there, and it doesn't need to do anything. But now let's go into the advanced configuration of this Webflow CMS task, where we can configure how to handle updates. So this is the update section, and by default it says that we just want to skip the updates. That if a record already exists, don't do anything, just skip it. But now let's change it to override. So now what this means is that if the record is already there, just override the data. So let's save this and deploy and run it again. So Reddit node is done. And Webflow is also successful. And now let's look into the stats. So we got 25 updates. Okay, so it updated all the records. And now let's look into the number of records in Webflow CMS. Let's refresh this. I want to show you that we still have 25 records. So see, like this number of records are still same. Here Webflow does not tell the number of records, but just by the size of the page you can see that there are only 25 records. And now there is another functionality that you can say that I don't want to overwrite all the records. Maybe overwrite only the records where where the value of this column is equal to some value. Okay, so for that purpose I already added this column called override. So now we will say that only update the records where override flag is true. Okay, so let's change the override flag for couple of records. Save and then save. So for 3 records we have updated the override flag to true, and for all the other records it's false or off. And now because we have made changes in Webflow, we have to redeploy this. So it's deployed, and we'll come back over here. So they are all published. So now let's say here that where override is equal to true, because it's a switch, so it's the value is either true or false. So now we are saying only override the records where this override value is equal to true. So now let's save this, again deploy and run. So this is successful. Now let's see how many records it updated. So it only updated 3 records. So based upon the value of the column override, so wherever override value is true, only those records it updated. Now other things that we can do with advanced tab, or other things we can configure, is this deleted at source. So now this is not really applicable for Reddit data, because on Reddit posts are not deleted. But if you're if you're working with some other source where the records can be deleted, so you have a bunch of ways that you can configure this functionality. So by default, it just ignores. So if something is deleted from the source data, so nothing happens on the nothing will be done for the Webflow CMS data. Now the other thing you can do is you can set the value of some column to a specific value. So for example, if there is a status column, you can say set the status column to expired. So now if any data is missing in the source data, so its column value will be set to expired uh, expired value. And now the last option is delete. So this what this means is if a data is deleted from the source data, you can just delete from Webflow CMS as well. So this is all the configuration that we provide for Webflow CMS, and as you can see, it's a very powerful way of managing data on Webflow CMS, and we provide a bunch of configuration options that you can use based upon your use case. And then it makes your life very easy if you want to work with the Webflow CMS. So thanks a lot for watching this video, and I hope you will find this functionality very helpful. Thanks.